Hello.
The rain tapped against the window like a metronome, marking the rhythm of my stagnant life. I sat in the dimly lit living room, scrolling aimlessly through my phone, feeling the weight of the empty space around me. My husband was away again, another business trip, another weekend of solitude. Our suburban Chicago home, once a haven, had become a silent, suffocating box. Loneliness wasn't just a feeling, it was the air I breathed. That night, something shifted. I threw on my coat, swiped on some lipstick, and walked out the door. The rain, cold and persistent, hit my face like a wake-up call. I didn't know where I was going. I just knew I needed to be anywhere but here. I wandered the streets until I found myself standing in front of a small old bar, the Old Lantern. It looked out of place against the modern storefronts. The warm glow from inside and the faint hum of classic rock music felt like a portal to a different time. I hesitated, then pushed the door open. The scent of wood, beer, and something familiar greeted me. I took a seat at the bar, ordered a glass of dry white wine, and tried to let the atmosphere wash over me. I hadn't taken my second sip when I felt it. A gaze. I turned slightly and saw him, seated a few tables away. Young, but not too young. Clean-cut, but casual. Our eyes met for a moment too long, and my pulse quickened. I looked away, then back again. He was still watching. I wondered what he saw. A woman alone, slightly disheveled but confident enough to hold his gaze? Or just someone seeking temporary escape? The curiosity in his eyes was undeniable. And that intrigue, however fleeting, stirred something in me I hadn't felt in years. In that moment, I didn't think about the consequences. I just knew I wasn't ready to go home yet. The next evening, I found myself back at the Old Lantern, half hoping and half dreading that he might be there. The door creaked as I stepped inside, and my eyes instinctively searched the room. There he was. Same table, same curious expression. Our gazes collided like magnets, and this time, neither of us looked away. I sat at the bar, pretending not to notice when he shifted in his seat. The bartender slid me a glass of wine without me asking. "Looks like you found a reason to come back," he said with a knowing smile. I forced a laugh, but my heart raced. He approached a few minutes later, his steps hesitant but deliberate. "Mind if I join you?" he asked, voice low and steady. I gestured to the stool beside me. Up close, he looked even younger, not in years, but in the openness of his expression. "You don't seem like a regular," I said, swirling the wine in my glass. "I'm not," he replied, "but I guess I was hoping I'd see you again." The words landed softly, disarming me. We talked about everything and nothing. Work, city life, how strange it feels when your dreams shift without permission. His eyes sparkled when he spoke of his new life here. But when I mentioned my husband, a shadow crossed his face. "It must be hard," he said, "being alone so often." I gave a short nod, the weight of unspoken truths pressing down. The bar's warmth turned stifling. "Do you want to take a walk?" I asked. Outside, the city was slick with rain again, the pavement shining like liquid glass. We walked without speaking until we reached the river. The silence stretched, not uncomfortable but charged. He stopped and looked at me, and without thinking, I mirrored the move. We stood there, the night wrapping around us like a shared secret, a shared understanding, fleeting yet undeniable. When we pulled back, reality seeped back in, heavy with implications. "We should go," I whispered, more to myself than to him. He nodded, his eyes clouded with the same uncertainty I felt. The walk back was quiet, the gravity of what had occurred settling in with each step. The days that followed blurred into a strange mix of guilt and anticipation. I went through the motions at home, cooking, cleaning, exchanging brief conversations with my husband, but my mind drifted to that night by the river. The memory of it felt like a secret too big to hold, yet impossible to let go. I caught myself glancing at my phone, wondering if he'd call, though I'd never given him my number. By Friday, the tension became unbearable. I told myself it was just curiosity, that I only wanted closure. So I went back to the Old Lantern. This time, I didn't bother pretending I wasn't looking for him. He was there. Our eyes met, and the unspoken understanding from that rainy night reignited instantly. He stood and walked over without hesitation. "I didn't think you'd come back," he said, sliding onto the stool beside me. "Neither did I answered. We talked about mundane things at first, the changing seasons, his new job, my volunteer work. But beneath the surface, a current of unresolved tension buzzed between us. The bartender's knowing glances made the air feel even heavier. "Do you ever wonder what might happen if you stop doing what's expected?" he asked suddenly. The question caught me off guard. I hesitated, thinking of my structured, predictable life. "Sometimes," I said quietly. "Me too," he admitted, his eyes holding mine with a mixture of curiosity and apprehension. Outside, the air was crisp and dry. We walked again, retracing our steps to the river. When we reached the bridge, he stopped and turned toward me. The weight of unsaid thoughts hung heavy. "I don't know why I keep coming back here," I confessed. "Maybe you're just tired of standing still," he replied. The truth of his words cut through me. And then, as if answering an unspoken challenge, that moment we'd danced around since the first night repeated itself. Inevitable, undeniable, and irreversible. It wasn't fireworks or movie-style passion. It was something quieter yet far more dangerous. A crossing of a line I could never uncross. The following days were a haze of routine and regret. Every morning I woke up beside my husband, his steady breathing a reminder of the life I had built and the choices that now haunted me. I went about my usual tasks, organizing the kitchen, answering emails, running errands, but my thoughts remained tethered to that night by the river. The guilt was sharp, but the memory of that fleeting moment of connection lingered even stronger. I convinced myself it was a one-time mistake. People stumble. We're all human. But as the week dragged on, I found my steps unconsciously retracing the path to the old lantern. One evening, after dinner, I stood by the kitchen window, staring into the dark. The thought of another night of quiet restlessness felt unbearable. Grabbing my coat, I told my husband I needed some air and left before he could question it. The bar was quieter than usual. The familiar hum of the jukebox played faintly in the background. I scanned the room, my pulse quickening when I saw him. He noticed me immediately, his lips curling into a cautious smile. I sat at the bar, but this time he didn't wait. He crossed the room and took the seat next to me. "I wasn't sure I'd see you again," he said, voice soft but steady. "Neither was I admitted, the truth sitting heavy between us. We talked about mundane things, the unpredictability of Chicago's weather, the best pizza spots in town. But the unspoken undercurrent was impossible to ignore. The bartender placed drinks in front of us without asking, his glance lingering on mine a moment longer than necessary. I wondered if he knew, if strangers could sense the invisible tether pulling us together. The air became stifling. "Let's walk," I said, standing up abruptly. He followed without a word. Outside, the city was cloaked in mist, the air thick and damp. We walked along the river, footsteps echoing against the wet pavement. "This can't happen again," I said, breaking the silence. "I know," he replied. "But here we are." We stopped at the same spot where it all began. The river's surface shimmered beneath the streetlights, reflecting our blurred silhouettes. My mind screamed for me to turn around, to go home and leave this reckless path behind. But my body betrayed me. The moment hung there, stretched by hesitation and inevitability. Then it happened again. A quiet confirmation of everything we hadn't said aloud. A choice made in silence, the weight of it settling deep in my chest. When we pulled apart, the city seemed louder. The sound of traffic, distant conversations, the soft lapping of water against the stone embankment, all reminders that life continued despite the decisions we make in secret. "We should go," I whispered. He nodded, his face unreadable in the dim light. We walked back in silence, side by side but miles apart, the consequences of our actions trailing behind us like shadows we could no longer outrun. The morning after that walk by the river, I stood in the kitchen watching the coffee drip into the pot, the rhythmic sound amplifying the silence. My husband sat at the table, eyes glued to his phone. His presence, once comforting, now felt like a reminder of a life I no longer recognized. I tried to shake off the unease, but the weight of the past days clung to me like a second skin. By afternoon, the tension became suffocating. I left the house, telling myself I just needed some air, but my feet, as if on autopilot, carried me back to the old lantern. I knew he'd be there. And he was. Same table, same hesitant smile. We didn't speak much. The silence felt more honest than words ever could. "We're walking a fine line," I finally said, voice low. "I know," he answered, "but sometimes fire is the only thing that reminds us we're still alive." The simplicity of his words struck a nerve. We left the bar and walked through the city streets. The chill in the air sharpened my thoughts. This was reckless, wrong, yet it felt like the only real thing in my life. As we reached the river, my phone buzzed. It was my husband. I let it go to voicemail. We stood there, looking at the water, each lost in our own thoughts. The future seemed like a fragile glass ornament, one careless move away from shattering. "This can't last," I whispered. "It doesn't have to," he said. "Some moments are just meant to be felt, not kept." We stood there, the night wrapping around us like a shared secret. But as I turned to leave, something shifted. Across the street, my husband's car was parked by the curb. My heart stuttered. The driver's side door was slightly ajar. "Wait here," I said, panic tightening my throat. I crossed the street, my steps quickening with each passing second. I reached the car and looked inside. The keys were still in the ignition. On the passenger seat lay a single folded piece of paper with 4 words written in my husband's familiar handwriting. "I know. It's over." The air left my lungs in a rush. I stood there, the world tilting beneath my feet. The realization hit me with brutal clarity. I turned back toward the river, but he was already gone. Just like that. A fleeting spark in the night, extinguished. The cold morning light found me still standing there, alone on the bridge, watching the river carry away the reflection of the life I once knew. And in that moment, I understood that some mistakes can't be undone. They can only be accepted. The weight of that truth settled in my chest, heavy and unyielding. I pulled out my phone, staring at the blank screen for a long time. Finally, I dialed my husband's number. It went straight to voicemail. "I'm sorry," I said, my voice cracking, "for everything." As I ended the call, the sun rose, painting the sky with soft hues of orange and pink. The city stirred awake around me, oblivious to the quiet unraveling of one life. I stood there, frozen in the moment, the river below whispering a lesson I'd never forget. Sometimes, the greatest cost of chasing what's missing is losing what you already had. This is an artistic and fictional creation intended for both entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to actual people or events is purely coincidental. Some scenes and dialogues in the video are part of a dramatized performance and incorporate elements of grotesque, satire, and exaggeration. The creator stands against discrimination, violence, and hatred. This channel fully complies with YouTube's policies and does not infringe upon copyright laws.
Bye-bye.